Hi, welcome to Biz Today. I am Nazareen Ebrahim. This is your weekly roundup of everything entrepreneurial. We focus on successful entrepreneurs who we find only the best and we bring them into studio. Or we look at current business topics, trending topics and ideas, and we find the people who are responsible for those initiatives, get them into studio and let you make your mind up about how it will impact your business. Now this week we're focusing, this week and the following weeks, we'll be focusing on Innovate Challenge, which is brought to you by Innovate Durban. What is it? Well, it's a space where entrepreneurs can come together, present ideas, and come up with a company very quickly. And they do that by partnering in teams. So it's almost like a competition challenge. But this week we're featuring the main sponsor for Innovate Challenge this year for 2017. We're speaking with Abbas. He is the Director for Innovation and Transformation at Oricon, South Africa. And Oricon is a large company that in Africa that provides advisory, design, delivery, and asset management services on projects across a range of markets in locations worldwide. So not only Africa, but worldwide as well. It's going to be interesting to talk to him about innovation in their space and how they're going to use it to transform the program for this year. So just stay tuned. Abbas, welcome to Biz Today.
Thank you very much. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for being in the studio and accepting our invitation at, I know, what was very short notice. We met this morning at an interesting concept, the launch of an interesting concept, which Oricon South Africa is proud to be one of the main partners to. Innovate Challenge under the brand Innovate Durban, which was an eThekwini municipality concept, is now being supported by Oricon South Africa.
That's right.
Please give us some insight into how this relationship came about.
Yeah, so we are a multinational company with a big footprint in Africa, 2,500 people in Africa, predominantly engineers and scientists, with the office in eThekwini as well. And then we have offices across the whole of South Africa. And where we go in right now as a company, say, what is the role of Oricon moving into the new South Africa? And how do we help shape the new South Africa? And so for us, innovation is a critical part of that. And so it's quite important that we are seen at innovation events across the country. So hence our participation at Innovate Durban.
I quite liked your approach this morning when you started out the presentation asking people, what is innovation? What does innovation mean to Oricon?
Yeah, it's a very good question. And I like starting the discussion that way because when you say innovation, people immediately think of cell phones, apps, technology. For us, innovation is much broader than that. So we see innovation as a way as preparing Oricon for the future. And for us, it's not about building better bridges or building better roads or putting out the great technology that we have. So we have fantastic technology in the business. For us, innovation is about saying, how do we inspire Africa? So we want to be known as an inspiration for Africa and not necessarily for building this bridge or building this road. And so how do we do that? As engineers, we are a very analytical animal. So engineers like following process. And yes, when you are designing a bridge, you better follow the right process, otherwise the bridge collapses. However, when you start dealing with complex and what we call wicked problems like urbanization, like innovation, you cannot use an analytical approach. You need to be more systems thinking when approaching these wicked problems. And the other important element of innovation is creativity. So you need to bring creativity into your thinking to be innovative. And again, as engineers, as technical people, we challenge with how do we bring creativity in the business. So Oricon has embarked on this journey of saying we want to be future ready. And in order to do that, we need to bring the creative world into our technical world. And so we believe if you can do that, there's a sweet spot where those two meet. And where they meet, you have innovation. Innovation flourishes, basically. And so to help us find that sweet spot, we use a systems thinking approach like design thinking. And so we've starting to embed design thinking into our DNA as engineers. And that's a very interesting journey because it's a completely different concept for engineers, because now you need to start interacting, engaging with people outside of your box. So when you start talking about thinking out of your box, you can only do that if you engage with people outside of your box. And so we start engaging with storytellers, with musicians, with artists in a very creative way. And so, for example, when we have client functions, we might have an art exhibition and all the art will be from our own people. We have in-house bands as well. And just recently, our vocalist of a band in Cape Town, a young lady who's a secretary, she got an opportunity to go sing in Italy. So she's left for Italy for a year to go sing off some island in Italy.
Right.
So that that inspiration came from just being part of an in-house band. So that's the sort of creativity that we want to bring into Oricon. And we think it's critical to do that if we want to be innovative.
Reminds me of Sir Ken Robinson's continual debate or ideology, because he's really given us something to think about, where he talks about how the schooling system has killed creativity.
Absolutely.
And what you're demonstrating with Oricon's programs and with your internal stakeholders is the ability for the analytical persona, which is generally the hard-headed, numbers only, laser sharp focus, to now have a softer approach to looking at life, which is quite interesting because entrepreneurs have to be the same way, right? Absolutely.
I think as an entrepreneur, you need a very systems thinking approach because you have all these challenges that that's approaching you when you're setting up a new business. And so having a systems thinking methodology does help you as an entrepreneur. But I think as Oricon, we're saying all professions are being disrupted, severely disrupted by technology. So whether it's in the engineering field, medical field, the legal field, it's how do companies respond to this disruption. And we believe that the Oricon that we have today is going to be very different to what it is in 10, 15 years' time. And so how do we prepare for that future? And so we've adopted design thinking. And if you look at Apple, it's a very successful company. And people have looked at Apple and said, why are they so successful? And it goes beyond the iPhone that they've produced. It goes into the whole way the company operates and the methodology and the culture of the company. And that's built around design thinking. And so businesses have now looked at design thinking over the last 2 decades and said, is there some value that we can take from design thinking and bringing that into business strategy? And so we find companies, global companies that have adopted design thinking that have been extremely successful, the likes of Marriott, Philips, SAP. They've all taken on a design thinking strategy. And one of the companies that really drive in design thinking is Google Ventures, for example.
That's right.
And they have in their business what they call a design sprint. It's 5 days from concept through to prototype. And using that methodology, they've made investments into more than 300 businesses. And we're not talking technology business. And they've invested into coffee companies. But they've been able to do that using this design thinking approach, which really takes you outside of your comfort zone. But fundamental to design thinking is placing the end user at the center of everything. So it's a human-centric approach.
It feels like it's almost about form, function, because when you say human-centric, and I want our viewers to understand this, the smallest of entrepreneurs in varying industries, be they service or product, all face the same kind of ability to be able to innovate in their spaces. Because that human-centric approach, if I think about it, and please help us understand this, is it about form and function and the way the human interacts? And can that form and function become better to produce an easier, a quicker output? Is that it?
So, design thinking is a very difficult concept to grasp if you haven't experienced it. And you need to go through these processes, these workshops, but actually working on projects. So I'll just give you a very simple example just so that people can touch and feel it. So as engineers, if we are working for a city council and let's say there's rivers in the city and they need to look at cleaning up the rivers, we as engineers will go in and start putting together documents as far as guidelines for the rivers, which will talk about how far you need to be away from the river to do development, what technology we can use to clean up the rivers, and that's a sort of traditional engineering approach. However, if you bring in a design thinking methodology, which we have now launched in Nairobi last Monday as part of the Innovation Week. So we went to the Innovation Week and we launched this project called By the Rivers. And what the project is about is saying this is this human-centric approach to a very technical engineering problem of polluted rivers. And instead of going in there with a technology solution, we're going in and saying, what is the history of rivers in African culture? And does rivers play a role in shaping the history and culture of Africa? And we find that rivers play a significant role in our African culture. And so there's this term in Nairobi called by the riverside. So when you had a special announcement to make, you would go down to the river to make it. If you had a special meeting, specifically between lovers, they would go down to the river for that. And then the role of rivers in African religion. And so we find that the rivers play this very, very important part in shaping African culture. And so we're saying, can we tell that story about claiming back the rivers? And if we take back the rivers and claim back the rivers, as Africans, we claim back our history, we claim back our culture. And we start talking about being proud to be African. And once you've told that story, you can then start talking about environmental issues. And then you can start talking about what technology can you do to solve that problem and get people to claim back the river. And so it's a very different approach to saying, here's a technology that can sort out your river problem. Because we find that too often in Africa, where we get bombarded with innovation technology. And they might be very good for Europe, but sometimes implemented inappropriately in Africa, or not through the lenses of Africa. And so we're saying, before you bring innovation and technology into Africa, make sure that it is appropriate. And we find that design thinking is a good way to test that, because you're speaking to the end user.
It almost makes me think, and before we go to break, I want to clarify this, makes me think that design thinking allows you to enable people who the solution is being presented to own that solution before they actually buy it. Because if they can see it through their lens, as you said, of their own story, then the ability for that solution to be implemented to better their lives is much easier.
Absolutely, you're absolutely correct. So that's fundamental to it. How do you get people to take ownership? So we have examples in Nairobi where the previous environmental minister, there were a stretch of the river, Nairobi River, that was being polluted because of workshops along the river, and they were just letting things run into the river. And he basically threw down all the workshops and planted trees and pathways and stuff, made it very nice. And when we visited that on Monday, the whole place was just run down and polluted because no one had taken ownership of that space. And so, you know, we do that continuously across the continent, where we start implementing things, building things, spending a lot of money, and community does not have ownership of it. And so fundamental, what we're saying, fundamental before you do anything, specifically complex, what we call wicked problems, you know, get the end user involved, and how do you get people to take ownership of what you are doing. And that means not coming and showing people a solution, because public participation is very well entrenched in South Africa. However, it's unfortunately after the event, after the designs have been done, you then go into a community hall presentation. And so that's so design thinking is not that. It's when we say engaging with the end user, it's not the big community hall participation. It's even before you draw the first line on the page, you need to engage with the end user.
100%. So when we come back from the break, we'll be exploring this conversation more. We're speaking with Abbas Jamie, who is the Director for Innovation and Transformation at Oricon, South Africa, but for the African continent, Abbas. And we're talking about design thinking, which I know we explored a little bit. But when we come back, we'll continue the conversation along that path and talk about our further engagement with Innovate Challenge and Innovate Durban. Stay tuned.